Ancient Rome is often viewed as a dirty, dangerous, and disease-ridden city, but was it really that bad? Welcome to my channel. And today let's find out if you would have liked living in ancient Rome. Viewer discretion is advised for this video, as some of this video may be offensive or disturbing. We, the makers of this video, in no way support or condone the actions of the subjects featured. Emperor Nero ruled over the Roman Empire from 54 to 68 AD. His mother, Agrippina, had him marry a woman named Poppaea Sabina, who bore him a daughter. But when Poppaea died, Nero began a relationship with a former slave, Pythagoras, who he later married. This made Agrippina furious, and she tried to poison Pythagoras, but the attempt failed and she was executed. Now, many historians agree that Pythagoras was a terrible partner and was only interested in money and power. So when Agrippina tried to poison her, she should have been happy. But it turns out that she wasn't. Pythagoras cried, begged for mercy, and even threw herself in front of Nero to protect her. She might have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for one small detail. She couldn't stop talking. According to Suetonius, she kept saying, "I am undone, I am undone," even after her execution. Historians believe that this might not have been an actual quote, but rather a misinterpretation. It could mean that her last words were actually, "I am innocent, I am innocent." In any case, Nero never forgot what she said, and it became a famous proverb in Rome, meaning, "It's too late to save yourself now." The life of a gladiator in ancient Rome was hard and dangerous, but surprisingly, they weren't necessarily slaves. In fact, many of them were free men who chose that profession. They could earn a lot of money and gain fame, especially if they were captured enemy soldiers. Being a gladiator was considered honorable, and most of them came from poor families who didn't have much to lose. The training was hard and dangerous, and most of them didn't survive their careers. The injuries were brutal, and there were very few medical advancements at the time. Also, being a gladiator wasn't like being an athlete. You weren't supposed to win your fights, but rather to die during the fight, preferably while entertaining the audience. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it took centuries for the city to become the metropolis we know about today. When Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, the population was around 1 million people. When the empire reached its peak, around 2 million people lived in the city, which made it the world's largest city for a long time. Most people were crowded into insulae, which were apartment buildings. They were usually 5 to 6 stories tall, poorly constructed, and lacked proper sewage systems or running water. There were also atrium houses, which were nicer and belonged to wealthier citizens. The housing situation was pretty bad overall, and people often had to deal with collapsing ceilings or falling debris. But compared to modern cities, the area was pretty clean. Public services would collect trash and take it outside the city walls. Ancient Rome is often viewed as a dirty, dangerous, and disease-ridden city, but was it really that bad? Well, yes and no. It's true that there were cases of outbreaks of the plague, but these occurred throughout history and still occur today. During the Antonine Plague, around 5 million people lost their lives. That was around 10% of the entire empire's population. But these outbreaks weren't unique to ancient Rome. The Black Death in Europe killed 30 to 50% of the population. But the outbreak in Rome was one of the first pandemics recorded by Western historians. Galen described the symptoms of the disease, including fever, chills, pain in the head and limbs, spots on the skin, and bleeding. He also noted that victims would die within a few days after the onset of the disease. While it is true that there were no antibiotics or advanced medical treatments at the time, doctors did try their best. They developed rudimentary surgical techniques and created the first military field hospitals. They also made some progress in understanding the human anatomy and physiology. But despite these advances, the Romans were still pretty superstitious when it came to medicine. They believed that diseases were caused by an imbalance of the 4 humors, and they used bloodletting and other treatments to try to restore this balance. These methods were often ineffective and sometimes even harmful. People in ancient Rome didn't have access to clean drinking water, so they had to use public fountains and baths instead. While these facilities were generally safe, outbreaks of disease could still occur due to contamination. For example, in the year 64 AD, a fire broke out in Rome, destroying a large portion of the city. This disaster resulted in thousands of people becoming homeless and overcrowded into unsanitary conditions. This led to an outbreak of the plague, which claimed an estimated 30,000 lives. However, it's important to note that diseases weren't always caused by a lack of cleanliness. For example, tuberculosis was widespread in ancient Rome, just as it is today in many parts of the world, and it can be transmitted through airborne bacteria that can live in crowded conditions regardless of how clean they are. Food safety was another issue in ancient Rome. Meat and fish were often left out in the open and could be contaminated by animals or other sources. This could lead to food poisoning and other illnesses. Additionally, the preparation of food was not always done in the most hygienic conditions. Food handlers may have had poor personal hygiene, and kitchen surfaces and utensils may not have been properly cleaned. This could result in the spread of bacteria and other disease-causing agents. Furthermore, the storage of food was often inadequate, leading to spoilage and the growth of microorganisms. Food may have been stored in containers that were not sealed properly or in areas that were not dry or cool enough. This could further contribute to the spread of diseases through contaminated food. It's important to note that foodborne illnesses are still a major problem today, especially in developing countries where food handling and storage practices may be inadequate. However, it's unclear whether the frequency and severity of foodborne illnesses in ancient Rome were worse than in other times and places. When you think of ancient Rome, you might imagine a bustling metropolis full of sights and sounds. How loud was the city, though? Imagine walking down a street filled with vendors hawking their wares, the sound of chariot wheels rumbling over the cobblestones, and the constant chatter of crowds going about their daily business. This was the reality of everyday life in ancient Rome. The noise level in the city could be deafening at times, especially in the crowded markets and along the busy roads. But it was also a testament to the energy and vibrancy of Roman life. Chariots were the main form of transportation in ancient Rome, and they rumbled through the streets day and night. The constant clatter of their wheels was a familiar sound to the citizens of Rome. Pedestrians had to be constantly on guard for stray chariots and other obstacles in the crowded streets. Accidents were common, and the injured were often left lying in the street without any medical attention. Despite the danger, chariot racing was a popular sport in ancient Rome, and spectators flocked to the Circus Maximus to watch the races. The roar of the crowds and the thunder of the chariots made for an unforgettable experience. Vendors were also a common sight in the streets of ancient Rome. They hawked their wares to the crowds, and their calls were a familiar sound to the citizens. The markets were especially noisy, as vendors competed with each other to attract customers. But the noise wasn't just limited to the streets. It was common for Romans to gather in public spaces to discuss politics, philosophy, and other topics. The debates could become heated, and the crowds often grew angry. The Colosseum was the site of many public spectacles, including gladiatorial combats, animal hunts, and executions. The crowds cheered and jeered as the gladiators fought to the death, and the air was thick with the smell of blood and sweat. The noise and excitement of the games were a big part of Roman entertainment. Even though the noise in ancient Rome could be overwhelming at times, it was also a reflection of the city's energy and vitality. The sound of chariots, vendors, and crowds were all part of the vibrant tapestry of Roman life. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Check out our other videos and leave a comment below with your suggestions for topics that we should cover in the future.